There is, it looks like a delay on my end. Well, I think I'll get started because we have a lot to cover in a short period of time. Good evening. This is the concrete or asphalt batch plant phase 2 public input meeting. Delay. Having a delay on my presentation for some reason. We do have captions available. If you look to the left of your screen, as shown here, you will see captions in English, Spanish, and other languages that are available. So just click the captions icon in the left corner of the screen to select the language, and your language of choice will display. On our agenda tonight, we actually have 3 public meetings. This is the first of 3 meetings. There'll be one tomorrow as well, November 29th from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. And then again on December 3rd, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And the December 3rd meeting will have Spanish translation available. So again, we're going to go through pretty quickly, just a quick introduction. We'll do welcome to staff. Then I'll do a brief presentation, just a quick update on phase 1, just a refresher on what happened with phase 1, and then we'll go through the phase 2 draft regulations, and then the most important part, we'll hear from the public and have a discussion, and we'll do staff closing comments from there. So with us tonight, we have, I believe, Andrea Gillis, our Assistant Director online, I believe. We have Sarah May, Chief Planner, with us tonight, and we have Mike King, who is our host. And I'm sorry, I'm Lori Levy, and I'll be the presenter tonight. Background, toward the end of last year, our planning and urban design staff prepared a memo, and that was at the request of our council member Blackman, who is the chair of the Environment and Sustainability Committee. And we were asked to come up with some strategies to effectively address the batch plants. And that was in with regards to their proximity mainly to sensitive land uses. So we prepared that memo in January, and then we presented a 2-phased approach, phase 1 and phase 2. And we took that through our, as we're required to, of course, to our zoning ordinance advisory committee and our city plan commission meetings. And then we took that recommendation on to the city council, again, as required for final action. That was on May 11th. And phase 1, excuse me, was approved, which added the specific use permit or SUP that is required for all temporary and permanent batch plants. Then again, on September 13th, staff presented an update on phase 2. Just a quick update on where we stood on that, on bringing phase 2 regulations, and also show the interactive map of the batch plants, and then of course a draft map. We presented that to our ZOAC committee. So again, the purpose of the code amendment for the batch plants is in support of the Comprehensive Environmental and Climate Action Plan, or CCAP, and that's with the goal of CCAP to ensure that new industries are an appropriate distance away from neighborhoods. And again, most critically, it's for the protection of sensitive land uses such as residences, parks, and schools. Of course, to improve the public health and air quality, and at the same time, also to provide appropriate locations for the batch plant operations, because we do recognize that it is definitely a need. It's an important industry. This is just an example and just a photo showing what a typical concrete batch plant would look like with the different pieces or elements of the equipment on the site labeled. This is just another photo example of one of our concrete batch plants in Dallas, of course. And, just kind of showing you the proximity to residential in some instances. Same here, and also here in the Joppa community as well. So we did a two-phased approach to address the urgency of sensitive land use issues. So our phase one short-term approach, which was already approved again by City Council in May, was to address the immediate concern or lack of a public process. And so what we did, staff removed the administrative by right approval process that was in place for the temporary batch plants. And we added the SUP, or the specific use permit process, which is a zoning process that requires the public hearings at both City Plan Commission, or CPC, and City Council. So right now we're at phase two. We have draft new regulations, and we did that through a comprehensive review. I know many of you were fortunately with us for the public input meetings. We had 3 of those meetings to discuss, your concerns for phase two, and that's what a lot of this meeting is about, actually, to show you how those are addressed. So again, phase two, a very comprehensive review. We did that through public input from the public, from you, industry and professional organizations, and then we had also coordination with state and federal jurisdictions, meaning TCEQ, TxDOT, and other organizations. And here I just have some of the dates that we conducted those meetings. And for our industry and professional organizations, we had TACA, TxDOT, we're at our Environment and Sustainability Committee, of course, and TCEQ. And then, still constant, continual input and coordination with our internal departments of within PUD of current planning. And then we had building inspection, OEQS, which is our environmental quality department. We had code compliance, stormwater management, public works, transportation, many other departments that aren't even listed here, but that's ongoing. And we did develop an internal checklist, and again, that is internal. It's not part of the regulations, but that will be done at our zoning application intake process, to make sure that all of the requirements are being met. It's kind of a checks and balances for the requirements. So let's get to that. So again, from the last meeting, we had some questions, and what the main impetus or the main thrust of the meeting or concern was appropriate distances from concrete or asphalt batch plants to residential, schools, and parks, and that's public schools and public parks. So the sensitive land use issues that was raised, that was the consensus more or less of the public input meetings, was that batch plants were located next to residential, including multifamily development. And so the suggestions basically from the public input meetings from you was that batch plants should not be allowed in residential neighborhoods. So the draft recommendations do that basically. For permanent batch plants, the recommendations or draft regulations are that they are only to be allowed in the IM or industrial manufacturing district with an approved specific use permit. So, they would not be allowed in residential neighborhoods. It would only be in that one zoning district with approval of an SUP. And then temporary batch plants would only only be allowed in residential districts if the plant is serving construction or partial reconstruction of a residential site, or with an approved SUP if it's a temporary batch plant offsite. And I can go into those categories. And then a permanent or temporary batch plant would only be allowed in special districts. And that's our walkable mixed use district, our walkable residential, our residential transition district, historic overlay, or new PDs with an approved SUP. So those would not be by right. We don't, we really are not looking to have those in these particular locations per se, because they're more pedestrian oriented. Apologies, my presentation's not advancing very well tonight. It's okay. So also with respect to sensitive land use issues, what we heard was that kids are playing at the soccer complex within 300 feet of an existing batch plant. And then we also heard the 15-foot distance that had been mentioned, by some in a majority of you in the public input meetings, of a distance you wanted to see from batch plants. We heard from some groups that 1,500 distance is arbitrary. It should not be predetermined. That would prohibit most batch plants and would put most concrete trucks on the road, contributing to more emissions and traffic. Some of the suggestions regarding the sensitive land use issues with respect to distance was that 440 yards, as required by TCEQ, is a good place to start, and maybe we can build on that. We also heard at least a quarter mile is an appropriate distance, and that TCEQ dictates 1,320 feet from residential uses. No batch plans should be allowed to locate side by side, and 1,500 minimum distance is the distance also for other industrial uses such as oil and gas drilling. We heard 1,300 foot to 1,500 foot minimum for permanent batch plants. Distance requirements to property lines should be part of the zoning process as determined with the SUP. And maybe a cap on the number of batch plants per residential area, or minimum distance between existing and new facilities. So for our draft recommendations, the distances, what we have right now is minimum distances from residential structure and or residential district, a public school or a public park, and from another batch plant that's permanent and temporary offsite only, would be as follows. For the permanent batch plants, and there are three categories. For a permanent batch plant, could be a concrete or asphalt batch plant. And the recommendation is to be 640 feet from, again, the residential structure, residential district, a public school or park, or from another batch plant. And then for the alternative green concrete batch plant, which is a plant that works essentially the same, but does the mix a little bit different of the concrete with more alternative, green, if you will, pervious type materials. So those kind of permanent batch plants, we're recommending 1,320 feet, again, from all the sensitive land uses, including from another batch plant of that type. A concrete or asphalt recycling facility also would fall under the purview of these batch plant regulations, and we're recommending 3,281 feet of the same. And then for the distances for a temporary batch plant, we're recommending 640 feet from the same, meaning from the sensitive land uses, including another batch plant, if it's off-site. 330 feet from just the sensitive land uses if it's on site, meaning if it's on the site that has the construction taking place and the need therefore for the batch plant. And then and also 330 feet from the sensitive land uses if that batch plant would be in the right of way. Then for the alternative green concrete batch plant, we're recommending the same, essentially, for a temporary facility. And then, of course, it's not applicable to have a concrete or asphalt recycling plant that's temporary. Those are permanent facilities. And the distances, so that you know, we got those from the guidance for the assessment of environmental factors, distances from sensitive land uses from the EPA, and that was back from 1986, but you know, of course, they've amended it over time, so it's as amended. And those are where we got those recommendations, basically from the distances of what they suggest. And then also in respect with these distances, appropriate distances from residential schools and public parks, there were equity issues that were raised. And what we heard about that is there were large concentrations of the batch plants in Black and brown communities, that those communities have taken the brunt of the batch plants, basically, and that we need to be greener. We need to take that into consideration, basically. So some of the suggestions that you had from the public had was batch plants should not be allowed in residential neighborhoods, no batch plants allowed to locate side by side, and separate batch plants from residential uses, not just areas zoned for residential. So again, how we're basically handling that through these regulations is that permanent batch plants are no longer allowed in IR, Industrial Research District. There are large swaths of land that are zoned IR industrial research right now. And to a large degree, there's a lot of that, if you will, in the Black and brown communities as well. You know, it's dispersed some other places, but it's concentrated a lot in those areas. So that will take care of some of that, certainly. Batch plants are only to be allowed in the IM district with an approved SUP, so only allowed in that one district now for the permanent batch plants. Temporary batch plants are allowed in residential districts only when they're serving that residential construction or partial reconstruction, and with an approved SUP if that temporary batch plant is off-site. And again, I have the distances and they're the same. It's just a repeat of that, but those distances will also help with those, with those equity issues and the suggestions to remove them from residential uses and not to be allowed in the residential neighborhoods, essentially. Also, there was a comment about the city allowed the batch plant uses through zoning and land use to be located mainly in Black and brown communities. And so suggestions were appropriate areas for these uses need to be addressed through Forward Dallas and then update the zoning, and asked us not to hesitate to rezone. That's Forward Dallas, and with respect to how the land use is addressed for our land use map, is not under the purview of this code amendment. That's a separate item, if you will, as part of Forward Dallas. And I know they've heard that input, and so I know our staff is working on that through Forward Dallas. I don't have any information on that, but that's certainly something that I just wanted to call to your attention. And then also regarding the distances, TCEQ and city regulations, we had issues brought up from you as well. TCEQ cannot consider the concentration of batch plants in the particulate matter. So again, there was a lot of discussion and concern about the concentration of, the cumulative impacts, if you will, of batch plants that are located, 3 on one side or just located very close together, and all of the emissions and the air quality issues from that concentration. So, excuse me, suggestions were no batch plants allowed to locate side by side. Again, the cap on the number of batch plants for residential area or the minimum distance between the existing batch plants and new facilities coming in. And then, of course, the zoning, the 440 yards brought up as required by TCEQ, unless a municipality has zoning regulations for batch plants already. So in other words, if the city has their own distance regulations, that's what the batch plants would go by. If that 440 yards by TCEQ would only be in effect if a city did not have their own distance regulations. So, and again, so the distances were raised. So our recommendations, again, no more than one batch plant allowed on a site area or lot area. Distance requirements between permanent and temporary offsite batch plants, and we've gone over those. And then distance requirements, a minimum of 1,320 feet for permanent batch plants, and that's the green concrete only. Otherwise, we have 1,640 feet for permanent batch plants and 3,281 feet for concrete or asphalt recycling. So, that's basically our minimums. So, also under TCEQ and city regulation issues, we also heard concrete materials need to be close to the projects they serve. Batch plants have already been studied by TCEQ. Of course, they have some regulations. We have regulations by municipality that our regulations by municipality is duplicative and confusing with the TCEQ regs. TCEQ has oversight based on modeling. And then that 440 yards established by TCEQ was not based on scientific data. Phase 1 requirements are onerous for temporary batch plants. Timing is of the essence, of course, and there's potential for construction delays. So the suggestions that mainly came out of that was TCEQ should be the main regulator. Well, in our recommendations, again, the temporary batch plants are allowed both on-site, off-site, and in the right-of-way with provisions. So that gives, a good, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It gives a lot of opportunities to handle the different needs for the temporary batch plants. So that should be helpful. The distance requirements that we're using or that we're recommending are based on the EPA Protection Act of 1986, as amended again, to be appropriate separation distances between sensitive land uses, and that's based on risk factors and other data that they have, scientific data. TCEQ distance requirements for on-site equipment are the same. We're leaving that intact. Distance to property lines are per our city regulations, though, based on EPA guidance. So you still have the TCEQ distance requirements for the on-site equipment. The silos and those other parts that we saw of a batch plant. So those stay the same. TCEQ is currently assessing, modeling of air contaminants under their rulemaking. We're not sure what's going to come out of that, but they are looking at that. I know that it seems to be pretty narrow focus, though, so it doesn't really impact our draft regulations. Temporary batch plants are also will be allowed by right in all districts except residential districts and special districts if all the provisions are met. So that does give an opportunity to go for a temporary batch plant to go faster if they can meet all of the requirements. But we just want to make sure that all the requirements are met. Otherwise, they would have to go through an SUP process. On renewals, we did, of course, hear concerns about renewals. So for the temporary batch plants, we heard are already allowed up to 180 days. That's correct, with extensions. And no definition for temporary batch plant. Well, we actually have a definition for temporary batch plant, but we are going to revise. We do have some revised definitions. Some suggestions were that the renewal process does need to provide accountability. It should run with the construction project it serves. No unlimited extension should be given. We should only allow one extension. So, that was kind of, there were differing opinions on that, but temporary plan should have to go back every 6 months. We heard that, and to define temporary batch plan. So in our recommendations, we are recommending 2 renewals per the updated construction contract as determined by the SUP. So if they can't, if they cannot get the job finished and get the batch plant removed and gone after 2 renewals per what their updated construction contract says, then they would have to get an SUP, and that would be determined and decided through the SUP. And then we do have definitions for each of the temporary batch plant subcategories. And in the definition, it does include the 180-day time frame. Renewals, again, issues for the permanent batch plants. What we heard, a batch plant has been in Joppy that received a 20-year permit with a 10-year auto renewal. What message are we sending, basically? So suggestions, the 20% required for opposition to an auto renewal is a burden, and we should put that back on the operators. We shouldn't have any auto renewals. So, we heard, again, a variety of suggestions for that. What we have in the draft recommendations are no renewals no renewals for the permanent batch plants unless they're imposed as part of an approved SUP. In other words, we have a lot of regulations now in the draft regulations that we feel will be appropriate for these uses, and there'll be checks and balances. There'll be more oversight, if you will, of the batch plants. And so what we're saying is we're not recommending that they have to have a renewal. Once the SUP gets approved for a permanent batch plant, we should have everything we need in place, but they do have to have an SUP. So, that's always under the purview of CPC and City Council, of course, to put a time limit, a renewal on there, but definitely no auto renewals for anything. And then other issues, we heard air quality issues for temporary batch plants, lack of focus on air quality, dust is a problem, environmental issues with respect to floodplain. So we heard more focus is obviously needed in those areas. We did hear no screening for temporary batch plants because it's not feasible, address the cumulative impacts, and the site needs to be large enough. What we looked at was, again, we do have additional provisions and regulations aimed at improving the air quality with the distances from the sensitive land uses. We do have dust suppression measures. I don't have any in here tonight. We have a limited time, but we also have ingress egress, where we don't want the ingress and egress to be on residential streets unless, of course, except for a temporary batch plant if it's serving a residential development, of course, and there's no other access. So we're also recommending screening and landscaping for permanent batch plants only, and then site restoration and remediation for all all the batch plant sites. And then greater than or equal to 100 feet from a floodplain or floodway. We did hear, that we should, go ahead and provide some health data. So there will be health data provided to all of our meetings. Our next one, by the way, we're planning to take the draft regulations to our Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee on December 13th. So that health data will be included in the staff report. Cumulative impacts are addressed with distance requirements between batch plants, and only one batch plant is allowed per site area or lot area. And then temporary screening requirements for temporary batch plants only, and then minimum 1 acre site requirements. For permanent, it was mentioned that we need to think about the infrastructure needed to improve the areas, excuse me, and that we need to consider a combination of vegetation and screening. So again, we still have the TCEQ requirements in place. We just have more city regulations than what we had previously. We're recommending a minimum 8-foot tall solid screening fence that applies unless the TCEQ requirements as stated to the left are not met. If a TCEQ requires a 12-foot tall fence to help capture half of the fugitive emissions if the stockpile is 50 feet from the property line. So, if they can't meet their distance requirements with respect to all the equipment per TCEQ, then they require them to put a 12-foot fence up. So, but if they meet all those TCEQ requirements, we're still recommending a minimum 8-foot solid screening fence. We're also recommending landscape buffers, 30 feet adjacent to streets, 20 feet adjacent to all other property lines. And then, of course, we have landscaping that'll be proposed in there. In a double staggered row, we have trees, interior to the fence, exterior to the fence. Parking, maneuvering, and driveways must be in a compacted subgrade and must be concrete or asphalt. No crushed or pervious surfaces are allowed in places where vehicles are operated. That's for permanent. And then it's very similar for temporary, only we're saying must be concrete or asphalt or a dust-proof surface and must be maintained as such. Crushed or pervious surface is prohibited in places where vehicles are operated. Property notification issues, we were asked to look at the 200-foot notification and then expand that out. So our recommendations, public notification shall be 500 feet. And that, of course, that's SUPs only. If in the instances of the temporary batch plants that are allowed by right, we wouldn't have the notification of 500 feet. It's really for the public hearing process, the SUPs. And then notification to the homeowners associations and public schools on record are actually the same distance as the distance requirements for the respective batch plant categories, meaning the 640 foot distance from the sensitive land uses. If it's 640 for that particular batch plant, then that's what the notification, it would match the same for the notification to the HOA and public school and HOA and public schools. We're also suggesting to the applicants that they meet with the nearby property owners, homeowners associations, and the surrounding businesses to address their concerns and incorporate those into the site plan. That's for SUPs only, again, for that public process. Property notification, we heard about signs posted on the property. We didn't really hear much about that, if anything, but we do have that included. So I just wanted to put that in there that, we're going to have regulations that signs are posted on the property and they have specific information on there, proper contact information in the event that there's an inquiry or a complaint or, just anything, in case we need to get in touch with that operator, person responsible for the site. And of course, they'll have name and that type of information and the SUP number and the expiration date per the certificate of occupancy if there's an expiration date. And then, signs, we want to make sure they're legible and they're consistent. So there's just some verbiage on that. We also heard some things about compliance, clear cutting of trees. There's not been any real change. There's renegade, non-compliant plants, and the lack of focus from the city regarding that. We were suggested that we codify some of TCEQ's requirements, get the operators in compliance, change our policies, those type of things. So on the clear cutting of the trees, that's not allowed by the landscape and tree preservation ordinance, and that's really more of an enforcement issue. So we advise you to call 311 on any of that to report it. On internal coordination, we're having internal coordination with applications, approvals, and non-compliance. That's been ongoing, and we've definitely, had some conversations with some that need a CO and those type of things. So it's already working. Concrete or asphalt batch plants must come into compliance within 2 years from the date of the ordinance, or at the time of the renewal date, whichever is first. We have an in-house checklist that we've developed. And of course, we can't finalize it until after the regulations, whatever gets approved. But that's part of our internal process. We'll have a checklist. Again, that same checklist will require distances to confirm their compliance with whatever, gets approved for those distances. As well as self-reporting for violations, emission incidents, and those type of things. We're also, as part of that checklist, we're going to require a copy of the TCEQ application and any SWIP applications, if applicable. That's basically stormwater control measures that kick in sometimes for stormwater management. And then we're going to use, of course, that internal interactive dashboard map so that we have better record keeping and spatial analysis. So our next steps, we anticipate bringing the results again to our Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee on December 13th. And if recommended by ZOAC or, whenever, staff and the ZOAC proposal will be forwarded to the CPC at the earliest available meeting. And then once we get a recommendation from CPC, if we get one to move it on, we will forward that on to our city council for final action. And so finally, I'm sorry, I know that was long. This is just instructions on how to speak. I know most of you know that, but just type speak followed by your name and address in the chat box, or use speak your name and address. We have Mike that can help us keep track of the call and speaker in order. He can help you with that. But again, before your comments, just please state your name and address for the record. And then call-in attendees, staff can call out the first 6 digits of the phone number if you'd like, and the host can unmute you, or you can just say pass if you decide you don't want to speak. So again, you can type speak, your name and address in the chat box, or raise your hand. And this is just a little diagram of where that is. I know most of you probably know where that is now, but just in case, it's the box that says to host toward the bottom, and you can just put speak, say your name and address. But we're pretty informal, so we'll get you. This is just to show you, if you want to see who's in the meeting right now attending, you can open the participants tab down here under participants, and it'll show you. Or if you can also click view all attendees over here. With that, this is just our contact information. Please feel free to email myself or Sarah Sarah May. That's our website link as well. If you have any comments or questions, please let us know. That is all I have, and I definitely, would like to take questions or comments.
I have a question. This is Commissioner DeRoe. You have said that only a batch company, a temporary or a permanent batch company, can only be next to a community if it's zone IM. Is that correct?
I couldn't hear some of that, but I think you were asking about the IM zoning. It's
Yes.
only a permanent batch plant will be required to be located in an IM zoning district with an SUP approval, specific use permit.
Okay.
And
So go ahead, Miss
oh,
Levin.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say that they are basically required now, a permanent batch plant, to get an SUP in an IM district anyway. So the difference is before you could apply for an SUP in an IR zoning also, I believe. So now it's just SUP and IM.
IM. Okay. IM is
In industrial manufacturing,
okay. I was making sure I kind of, and IR is
industrial research district.
okay. And you by chance don't know which one is Joppe, IM or IR. I think it's IM, but
Well, they have both, I believe.
okay, okay,
But
okay,
there's a lot of IR in that general area, and that Council District 6, West Dallas area. There's
okay.
quite a
So
bit.
I ain't gonna take up too many much time. So so by being IR, right? Does this ordinance be able to implement in IR zonings, like in West Dallas and Joplin?
I'm sorry, I only
I'm
heard the tail end again.
okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, my question is, with this new batch pan ordinance, you say West Dallas and Joplin is IR and IM. Would the
Ye-
same regulations made it for IR?
I, I wasn't sure I heard you. Let me,
Oh, I'm
I have,
sorry.
no, it's okay. I don't know if this is going to help, but I'm going to try. Oh, it's not on there. I thought I had it labeled at one time. I don't have that zoning in front of me.
Uh-huh.
I can what I can do is because again, I think it's both, but again in that whole general council district, there is a lot of IR zoning, but I can if you would
So
like.
does the new does the new regulations with the batch plant ordinance uh requires the IR to follow request of a IR SUP? Does the new batch plant ordinance regulations apply to them too? IR.
Okay. So under the new regulations, they can only locate in IM, but they still need an SUP
Uh-huh.
for a permanent batch plan. Now,
Okay.
for the temporary batch plans, they can be in any district except, again, the special districts, and um, they can't really locate in a residential district unless they're serving a residential development site. Um, But otherwise they can locate in any district. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah.
Oh,
I email you my question because
please.
I yeah, I'm gonna email it because I don't think you I was asking, do the regulations for the new batch plant affects the IR zoning, but I email it to you.
Well, yes, it will, if, you know, it could, depending on, you know, what gets approved, because again, we have the 2-year compliance for
Mm-hmm.
any batch plans that
Okay.
don't match up with these regulations.
Okay. Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
You're most welcome. Please do though, if you
But
have
I'm
further
still gonna
questions.
email you, yeah, because
Okay.
I think you
Thank you.
answered it, but
Yes.
I don't know if
Lori,
I'm
this is
getting the
Ken
right
Smith.
information.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, this is just some basic information that I can't quite understand. We've mentioned phase one and phase two quite a bit, and those are terms that are used quite often when we're talking about environmental issues. We're not talking about the phase one and phase two processes when we're trying to discover what environmental issues are. We're just talking about phase one, phase two of the process for this batch plan. Am I correct?
Ye- That is correct. That is
Okay.
correct. And we only split it into phase one and phase two because, you know, this part was going to take months, you know, a lot longer to develop the appropriate distance and all the regulations. And we wanted to address the immediate concern of the batch plants. So we split it and did phase one where all the batch plants had to come in through zoning.
Okay, but just a couple of quick little questions. When we or the city does its distances, 200 feet, 1,000 feet, whatever, how do you do that? Is that by drone, satellite, computer? Somebody go out there with a tape? What exactly is it? And the B part is it from property line to property line? Is it from the center to center like they do with mileage? For the distance between Houston and Dallas, I found out was from city hall to city hall, not from, property line to property line. What is it?
Yes, sir. That is a great question. Thank you for that question. Um, it is from property line of the batch plant to property line of a residential zoning district, a public park or a public school, or to another batch plant, property line to property line. It changes slightly with the residential structure. It would be property line of the batch plant to nearest point of the residential structure
Okay, okay.
for a residence.
And do you do that with software or satellites, or how do you
It,
literally
it
do it?
It could be. I mean, the burden would be on the applicant. It would be on staff too. Like right now, we have that measurement in our map, our interactive map. So it's done through our GIS system, our geographic information system that we use. Um, but we're also putting the burden, of course, on the operators to tell us what those distances are through our intake process. And so that's kind of a checks and balances. But we'll be able to see it through the map. We'll be checking those distances from our map.
It,
And
it may
that's,
be good in community meetings to say how you do it, because it may be an issue that people may have, and
yes,
someone may have fudged the numbers and we don't even know. I mean, I'm protesting my property tax. They have the square footage of my house completely wrong, and I never knew it for 20 years. So when we actually went out and did real measurements, it was far greaterly reduced. So that helped me.
yes,
And
sir. No, thank you. You know, of course, we only have an hour and I wanted to address the public comments in our next meeting. We'll have a more thorough discussion of everything and there'll be a staff report with more information and, you know, to be much more comprehensive. Thank you so much for that question, you know, on everyone's behalf. So thank you so much.
one last one.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
in South Dallas and West Dallas, we have a issue with so much environmentally contaminated land. It stretches way beyond any phase two that might have been done, just knowing what has been there in the future. Is that a requirement for temporary or permanent batch plants to do the environmental phase one and phase two when they are applying for these
Yes.
ordinances?
We actually have, we do have some restoration and remediation and some information that when any of the batch plants leave a site, we have some restoration and remediation language in there that they have to restore it back to the original condition. We do have also that they have to document how the site was before they got on the site, before they do any work or anything on the site. So we will have that. So to answer you, yes. Now, whether it's phase one and phase two, I'm not sure about that yet. And I can't speak for any other regulations right now as to what our environmental quality department may be doing as well, or federal or state. You know, I don't know if any of that's coming into play. It may depend on the site. I know, for instance, if a site had underground gasoline storage, I believe that state requirements that they have to do, you know, they have to go through an environmental process, if you will. So that, you know, obviously that would be something separate, but we will have something, yes, sir, to answer your question, to handle the environmental, you know, to see what the conditions are before they start, and then documentation and an inspection after they leave the site, you know, trying to make sure that that site is restored and remediated appropriately.
Lori,
Yes, yes, ma'am.
it's Rita Beving
Hi.
with Public Citizen, and I have a few quick questions. First, is this can you send this presentation to those of us on the call?
Well, this presentation will be posted on our website, and it's
Oh,
usually
okay.
pretty fast. But yeah, all of it will definitely be posted, and then of course we do have the another presentation that'll be the same tomorrow. But yes, absolutely. If you need it faster, let me know. But
Okay.
it usually doesn't take, you know, but a day or so to get it posted on our website.
Okay, the other question I have is, how did you guys arrive at the 2-year number on the renewals?
Um, Honestly, we just felt like 2 years was fairly reasonable. There was language. There was 2 years in another. I can't remember what, to be honest with you, which other ordinance it was. But so we kind of took, I think it from another ordinance that we had where compliance was about 2 years. We just felt like, you know, we know it's urgent. This has been a big concern. So, you know, we just felt like 2 years was reasonable too, a reasonable time frame. We didn't want to have it so short that, you know, we felt like it was a reasonable amount of time for an operator to, you know, start thinking about how to get into compliance or, you know, whatever arrangements they need to make.
And then lastly, you know, I noted the a renewal is given if needed with an updated construction contract. I assume they're going to have to submit those documents as proof
Yes, ma'am.
that they need a renewal. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. You're most welcome. Thank you for the questions.
I've got a couple of questions, please.
Yes, yes, sir.
Tip House Wright, City Planning Commission, District 10.
Oh,
When-
thank
when
you.
we-
Yes, Commissioner, thank you.
When we talk about residential districts and the distance from residential districts to the batch plants and batch plants not being allowed in residential districts, are we talking about single family only? Or do we include townhouse and multifamily? What define residential?
That's a great question. Yeah, it does. I have those districts on one of the slides. But yes, it would be the duplex. It is single family, and it also includes multifamily.
Okay, okay. Um, I noticed that you received input at some point from TxDOT. Have you received any input from, for example, Association of General Contractors, National Association of Home Builders, any of the large industry groups that represent construction industry? Have you gotten any input from them?
Um, it was really more of a collective through these meetings. They were invited. They definitely are on our contact list, and we sent that out. So they've definitely been a part of it. Any really specific input from them, I don't recall. It was more of in these meetings, maybe. Um, and there were a lot of people speaking, so I may not have realized that it may have come from them. We do have a TxDOT meeting this week, as well as some of the other industries for the concrete industries, basically, TACA. We have that meeting scheduled, as well as TxDOT as a separate meeting. But otherwise, all of those other groups were notified as well.
Okay. Last question. In my district, in District 10, there's a very large recycling operation, concrete recycling operation. I think it's associated with the LBJ East contract. It's very active, big, giant site right next to the Hamilton Park neighborhood. Would be definitely be non-compliant with the 3,281 foot distance that your slides described. So would I understand that they would, well, like they're on a 2-year clock? Walk through that one more time with me.
Well, you know, it's said that they have to come into compliance. Honestly, I mean, that's something that we're going to have to continue to work through with our council, if you will. Um, you know, the way it usually works is, they can operate, non-conforming, you know, somewhat non-conforming maybe until they make a change or something like that, or have to come back through the process. In this case, like I said, it's either going to be they come into compliance within 2 years. If they're on a renewal, then it's going to be faster than 2 years if it's, if it happens to be less than 2 years. Um, I I don't have the specifics of that yet because again, we're still gonna, we're gonna need to work that out through council, on exactly, what that's gonna mean. And that's something that we'll be looking at through the meetings, exactly which ones are impacted and, you know, the ability for them to come into compliance.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Council, Commissioner Housewright. Thank you for the questions.
Dallas Cawthorn with Master Plan 2201 Main Street. So what about the sites that have SUPs that their term has 8 or 6 more years to run and they've made investments based on that number? Are you going to reduce them from 6 years remaining to only 2 years? And how does the city think that they, I mean, I don't know that the city's done that in the past. I've got lots of questions, but I mean,
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'm saying from the language, they had, if we go by strictly just by the language, then yeah, they still have to come in to compliance, because it's 2 years or
so if
it's,
they've got a lease term that runs commensurate with the pro, because most of these they don't buy, they lease, and they got a 10-year term, let's say, and they invested millions of dollars based on 10 years of contracts, and they could end up eating 8 years of their lease and 8 years of their investment. I don't. I mean, that's why the city has an amortization process. This seems really inconsistent you know, you're changing the rules absolutely in the middle of the game, where, you know, I mean, I can't point to another time in my long career doing cases where that's been the case. And while I don't, I mean, it's, that's real concerning.
Right. I appreciate the question. It's a great question and a concern. I understand the concern. We are still working through that. You know, obviously as we, you know, get further along with the meetings and, you know, get with council on all the verbiage and all the details, you know, of that verbiage. You know, we'll have a little bit more definitive on that, but
I hope for the meeting with ZOAC that that the city attorney's office you know, has some analysis about, is that a taking or not? Because it sure seems like there's a lot of loss that both fee owners and lessees would take in that instance. And the council and the commission are the very ones that gave them those rights when they went through the SUP process when it occurred. So to take it away, you know, I hope that'll be a key factor that's discussed at ZOAC. I look forward to that.
thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Mr. Schoenbeck has been patiently waiting, and then Mr. Martinez would like to speak as well.
Sure, and I just want to say, Ms. Levy, Dallas's concern puts new emphasis on this for my group and our own concerns, and we're encouraged by these rules and his reaction, and so take that as you like. My question is related to a specific facility. Since it accepts, blends, and then exports asphalt out to other GAF factories, are y'all defining the GAF West Dallas facility as a permanent batch plant?
No, sir, it is not. I believe it's considered asphalt manufacturing. I believe that's the term. You know,
What is your definition of a batch plant? Because that's what they do, right? They batch and then blend and send it out.
yeah, I can read them to you. We have several right now, because we have amended them, but, so I have quite a few. There's one for, permanent asphalt or concrete batch plant. That means an asphalt or concrete batch plant, that is not a temporary asphalt or concrete batch plant, but we have more specific definitions, that we basically met or mirroring with TCEQ's definitions. So we're lining them up a little bit more with that. So
Is it possible to be both in any of those situations, both an asphalt manufacturer and an asphalt batch plant?
it's really a different use. I'll be honest with you, but let me say this, and it's a fairly long definition for the other one that we have. Let me read that really quickly, and then I'd like to say something about the other industrial uses. An asphalt or concrete batch plant means a plant that consists of an asphalt or concrete batch facility and associated abatement equipment, including but not limited to material storage silos. If you remember that picture that I had up with the labels on the different components, aggregate storage bins, auxiliary storage tanks, conveyors, way hoppers, and a mixer. Asphalt or concrete batch plants can add water, cement, and aggregates into a delivery truck, or the concrete may be prepared in a central mix drum and transferred to a delivery truck for transport. This definition does not include operations that meet the requirements of, and it has a number, it's a TCEQ number, 30 TAC 106.141 batch mixer, or 30 TAC 106.146 soil stabilization plan. So it's pretty specific to the batch plants. It does include the recycling facility, but the other industrial uses, we did look at other industrial uses, and we feel like a lot of these requirements will be very applicable to other industrial uses that are, especially the potentially incompatible industrial uses, like what you're mentioning. However, we really focused more on the batch plants here. We mapped those, we did analysis, we met with those industries specifically. It's very comprehensive, and for us to bring in other uses now, without that proper analysis and meeting with those industries just wasn't appropriate, we felt like, at this time. But however, we do think it would be appropriate to bring back those other industrial uses after whatever the outcome is of this. And a lot of this work has been done, and that could be applicable maybe, that will help. So to answer your question, we will still look at other industrial uses under that potentially incompatible description. But it was
That's
just
fair.
beyond the scope. It just was a little beyond the scope.
That's fair. These are good rules. I'm delighted by them. I just wish you would look kind of more, apply more scrutiny to what it is that's actually done, because according to that definition, that's exactly what GAF does in part in terms of asphalt, not the concrete part, but the asphalt. That's exactly what they do. So our position is that it can do both at the same time, but thanks.
Thank you for the question.
Mrs. Martinez?
Hi, Mike. I'm sorry. Did you say, were there any more questions, or?
Mrs. Martinez?
Yes, hi. Hi.
Hi.
I had a couple questions and comments. First, thank you so much for this presentation and this information. One, I will say that's a lot of information for the public to take in one meeting, and I would encourage you to see how you can kind of present it in a more accessible way. Maybe if there's one slide with like the top draft recommendations that you're putting forward, so we can see that all on one slide, that would be really helpful. I would like to go through it and then make more detailed comments at another time. But a couple things that stood out to me is, one, I think I heard you mention that the cumulative impacts of these concrete batch plants will be addressed by the distance requirements. And I'd like to push back on that a bit, because the distance requirements will be applied uniformly across the city. But as we know, there are areas where we already have an overburden of these facilities, such as in West Dallas, such as in Joppa, as you've heard from other folks on this call. So I don't think that addresses the cumulative impacts. To the notification requirements, I saw that you were proposing to expand it, and then expanding to the HOA and schools within the larger distance requirements. But I would encourage you to expand the notification to all property owners and residents within the larger distance requirements, because in these areas where we have this over concentration, we don't have a ton of HOAs. We have neighborhood associations. So I don't know if you are including neighborhood associations in that as well. But it's not sufficient even then, even with those expanded notification requirements. And then I had one more comment that I can't remember, but if it comes to me, I'll mention it. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I appreciate the feedback on that. On the cumulative impacts, it's really the distance requirements, also specifying that only one would be allowed on one lot or site. That's different from TCEQ, where they they actually will allow more than one operator on what they call a site, which is different than what we call a site. And a site, under their definition, it's my understanding, is from the same owner or operator. So, and we do have that instance where there's one large property, I guess you could say, and there's three individual plants on that. So that's what that's trying to address in doing that. So minimum of one per site, the distance requirements as well. And so, yes, so anyway, I was, I just wanted to iterate that, it's more than one item, but, oh, and the other one, of course, is, not having the IR take, that's kind of that's a big one right there. And again, this presentation was focused on the feedback from the public, of course, and trying to address how, how it aligns with what the comments were. And that's why it was presented this way. I tried, I appreciate the comments for the benefit of the public who is, this is the first time they're hearing it. That's why all of the, the slides before we get to the actual recommendations are in here. I can try to go faster, maybe skip some, but again, it's just for the benefit of those who are not familiar at all and weren't a part of all of the first meetings and on phase one and what happened. Thank you so much. If you have any further questions, though, or comments, if you think of anything else, please do email me, and I appreciate it.
I show no other speakers, Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's time and input. Great questions. For those who didn't ask any questions, but I'm sure, some may come up, please do email me. Also tomorrow, again, we will have the same presentation tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. So thank you so much, and everyone have a wonderful night.
I have one more question.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes.
Dallas Carthan mentioned a meeting. What is the Zorock meeting? What's the meeting that Mr. Dallas mentioned?
Yes, ma'am. Well, tomorrow we have another public input meeting from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. But then this is the public input meeting. We're bringing the recommendations in much more, more detail and more information to our zoning ordinance advisory committee. That's a body that always has to make a recommendation on any of our code amendments, which is what this is. So we will be bringing the regulations and that staff report to them on December 13th. And I believe it's at 9 a.m. It usually is, but we send the agendas out and post those agendas before before the meeting. And the staff report will be attached. It'll be on the website, and it will go out with the agenda to the interested parties list. But that's part of that starts our process basically, where it's public hearing, and we bring it to our zoning ordinance advisory committee. They have to make a recommendation. They may not do it in one meeting. We, probably it's probably going to be more than one meeting. But once they make their recommendation, then we forward it on to the City Plan Commission, or CPC. And same thing, we do a presentation and they have a staff report and they make their recommendation. And whenever they finish their recommendation, then that recommendation we forward on to the city council. And the city council has the final action authority of what gets approved, what actually gets into our ordinance, our development code.
Okay. So is the environmental commission gonna get an invite to the December the 13th meeting? Because I would like to attend that meeting.
What, I'm sorry, did you wanted information on it? Is that what you were asking?
No, I say, is the environmental commission getting an invite to this meeting? Because I would like to be at this meeting.
Oh,
As the
yeah.
commissioner, I'm the commissioner for District 7, and I would
Oh,
like
I'm
to be
sorry.
at this meeting.
I
Yes.
am so sorry. Yes, ma'am, Commissioner. Yes, I mean, I know that the chairwoman Bazan, was, got information on it, and I believe she was attending tonight. I'm not sure.
Yes, she's
I can't
on.
see all the participants. I'm sorry, but, yes, absolutely.
She's
And I
on.
don't, I
Okay.
don't know if there'll be a formal presentation. I know we've already had, we've gone to them once or twice with some of the information. I don't know if we're gonna be able to do at some point in between a presentation to the committee. It's possible. I don't know, but this is just part of the, our process that we have to follow in order to get a code amendment approved.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Lisa.
you.
You're
Thank you.
Good evening, Ms. Levy. This is Joanna Hampton.
Hi, yes.
Good evening.
Yes.
Commissioner Darrow, I serve on City Plan Commission as well and on the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee. We do often have our other commissioners who attend the meeting. I'm sure you'll be on the invitation list, and we would welcome having you at the meeting if you're available to attend.
Yes,
I just wanted to state that since I was here. Nice to meet you virtually.
thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. I'll be looking forward for that invite.
Thank you, Ms. Levy.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner Hampton. Thank you very much. Mike, did you have anyone else or?
Nope, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms.
Well,
Levy.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Madam Chair, and Commissioner Hampton. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner Darrow. I don't know if Commissioner Hauswright is still on here, and Ms. Martinez, Mr. Schirnbeck, Mr. Cothram. I'm not sure who's still on the call. Ms. Bebbing, Mr. Smith. Thank you all very much. I hope I didn't leave anyone out, but thank you everyone for joining us tonight and for the excellent questions. And again, we'll have the presentation again tomorrow morning, and then we'll have it again on Saturday morning. The one on Saturday, December 3rd, is from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m.
Awesome. Have a great night.
All right. Thank you. You too.
All right.
Good night.